This is Coda Radio, episode 193 for February 22nd, 2016. And welcome to Coda Radio, Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly talk show taking a pragmatic look at the art and business of software development and related technologies. This episode is brought to you by our two fine sponsors, DigitalOcean and Linux Academy. I'll tell you more about those great sponsors as this here show goes on. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our sophisticated host, established with what looks like a weapon in his hand. Why, yes, folks, is Mr. Michael Dominic. Hey there, Michael.
Hello, Chris, and a hearty bonjour to anyone in Montreal today.
Oh, what's the occasion?
I don't know.
Okay. All right. I'm a little punchy today, so I'll just go with it. I was yesterday, I'll tell you what, Mike. Yesterday was one of those days where I don't always mind working a 9 to 9 day, like a 12-hour day.
That's a half day, buddy.
Sure. But on a Sunday, that's the day of rest, Mike. That's.
You remember what Jesus said.
Well, I believe he told me I'm not supposed to work on a Sunday, so I'm feeling good. What?
His newest prophet, Britney Spears, has a song. Title is Work Bitch.
I know.
The subtitle is Twice on Sunday.
Yeah, apparently. I made a big mistake. I had a 2-hour show, a 2-hour and 10-minute show of the Linux Action Show. And in video encoding and in video editing, there is this magical threshold at the 59-minute and 59-second mark. When you cross that, it exponentially becomes more work. The encoding becomes way more work. The rendering, the way the system is processing these large files to analyze the waveforms just becomes an unbelievable, monstrous task for the system. Encoding the WebM literally goes at actual real time. So, in fact, sometimes even less than real time. So if it's a 2-hour file, sometimes it takes more than 2 hours to encode. It was brutal, Mike, brutal. So I'm here, I'm raw, and I'm ready to go. I'm fired up about today. So no pressure.
I have a raging, absolutely throbbing, raging Donald Trump for some people today.
Yeah, you got. I kind of talked about midway in the show today, but you got something coming up that I'm just going to sit back, and I brought my buckle like you told me to. So I can buckle up to my chair, and I'll stand by for turbulence. But before we get into turbulence, you were tweeting recently that you had a Could you explain? Because since the last show, you've had some hardware failures. You've been swapping machines. You've been running on Linux.
So shoving something in an SD card into your Mac and expanding the hard drive, shockingly not a great idea.
So the machine that had the drive pop on you was the machine that you did the expanded disk thing on?
Yes, it was.
You're joking.
Yep.
No. Now, do you think it's related? It must be, right?
I mean, I only know what the Genius Bar told me, that the drive was all screwed up. So yay! Yeah, it would be an amazing coincidence if it wasn't, right?
I find that to be
super scary.
Yeah, and it's particularly Linux has its own bag of problems. But the Mac OS kernel and the way the updates work and all of that, to do something that it works at the driver level like that is extremely, extremely difficult on the Mac. And I'm just basing that on years now of third-party
I should have known better, right? Because the crappiest part of OS X is the file system. So let me shove an SD card into it and expand.
And it's, to be honest with you, it's a bad file system complicated by the fact that their driver model makes the Linux driver model look evolved, because I have several, I have third-party capture devices, lots of capture devices. I even have external encoding devices that hook up via PCI Express that offload H.264 encoding. I've got all these different types of devices, and they fundamentally break between updates. And so much to the point now where, there's a Mac that runs a soundboard in the studio, and it's hard locked right now at 10.9.5 because if I update it, then when you go to the next version, FireWire support is removed because of something that changed in OS X, and you have to switch over to Thunderbolt. And there's a lot of people that report that switch over from controlling the mixer via FireWire to Thunderbolt. It really screws things up, but also it locks me into always using a Mac from that point forward, because once you switch over to Thunderbolt, there's a firmware update that goes to my mixer, and it only works over Thunderbolt to a Mac from that point forward. And it's that kind of like, there's these weird things that happen after incremental OS updates that ruin third-party devices. So when you're using a device that's expanding your file system and probably in theory connecting in as a kernel, as a K extension.
I mean, so to anybody who is listening and doesn't know what the hell I'm talking about, I had tried the TARDISC product, which is a fancy SD card with flash storage on it that expands your Mac hard drive, because my main machine was a MacBook Pro, and I cheaped out and didn't get a big hard drive on it when I bought it a couple years back. So that was a problem, right? And I'm not really down with buying another machine right now.
Yeah, right.
The TARDISC was in for, what was it, 2 weeks?
Yeah,
2.5, maybe three.
Maybe 3.
Maybe I made it 3. I think I made it 3. Let's give him 3.
Yeah, because it was just long enough that I forgot about it, which sounds about 3 weeks.
To be fair, I made no effort to confirm that was the problem, but the timeline's pretty... because I had just installed a bunch more stuff, just enough to fill up the actual drive itself, right?
So you're probably just starting to use that expansion and swapping.
Actually use it. Yeah,
Wow.
I mean, not to denigrate. Maybe I got a bad unit, whatever, but something I'm not going to be trying again.
And so this was this one of the MacBooks with the physically installed, like, connected disk, or did it have a removable disk?
I don't know. So it was interesting because I thought it was toast, right? Because
yeah, sure, man.
The reason I took it to the Genius Bar was not only was it kernel panicking, but it got to the point where it wouldn't turn on at all.
Wow.
So I was like, all right, you know what? This is probably like a problem. So I went ahead and took it, and they were like, yeah, this is a problem. So it turned out that they just had to replace the drive. And for good measure, they said the backlight on my monitor because it's a laptop, right? So they're all backlit. They said it was starting to be on the fritz too, so they threw that in too. But.
See, now, so I was just hard on Apple. Let me shift gears here for a second and just say, we had an old used MacBook that had a faulty video card. And to be honest with you, I just thought it was my fault, because we got this laptop, and then it's almost running 24/7, like just cooking, right? Just absolutely cooking. Well, not 24/7, but a good solid 12 hours a day. It is running maximum CPU, maximum GPU, absolute thermal limits of the design of the hardware. And after about a year and a half, 2 years, the video card started crapping out. Started getting lines across the screen, and then eventually just worse and worse and worse, couldn't boot the system. And I thought, oh, well, I cooked it. I knew better. I knew I should be using a desktop PC for that. And then a year and a half after that, after its warranty had expired and everything, they instituted, in fact, I think they just actually extended this program. And we're talking, Mike, this might have been a 2008, 2009, 2011 era MacBook. And they took it in, they replaced the main board and the video card. And while they were in there, they were like, well, yeah, since it sat around for a while and you couldn't really use it very well, the battery didn't hold up very well, so we gave you a new battery too. And we just installed that for you and hooked it all up. So you got a new battery. You got essentially a new motherboard with a Core i7 processor, 16 gigabytes of RAM, a 512 gigabyte SSD drive, and by the way, now it's got an old GPU, but it's a brand new part again. And they just took a laptop that I put on the shelf and said, well, I got 2 years out of that, and I pushed the hell out of it. And they're like, here you go, everything works, and we've even given you a brand new battery.
Yeah, their deal was like, it's $280, and that's it.
Yeah, they didn't even charge me a penny because it was an RMA.
Oh no, they were like, it's $280, and it could be less, but it won't be more.
Yeah,
I was like,
that end of the process, like,
it's really good. Their support is really good. Yeah, because they told me that they didn't just replace the light in the monitor, which I had no idea was a problem. They said they replaced the whole assembly for it.
I think that's just what they do because it's easier for them.
It's just one component. They just ripped it out and put a new one in. They also, I guess my computer's filthy because they said they cleaned it.
Well, maybe the fans, right? Yeah. So, but this is sort of a long way of saying, in the meantime, you pulled out like an older rig that was like a Mac Mini or something, right?
Which was terrible. Yeah.
And at the time, it was running Mac OS.
So this was an older Mac Mini that was running Snow Leopard, I think.
Okay.
the performance on it was really, really bad. Now, it's only got 4 gigs. It's got a solid-state drive. I'm sorry, I think it had 8 gigs. 8 gigs. Solid-state drive.
Oh, that's nice. The solid-state drive is going to get you somewhere.
Not solid-state. Not solid-state. Not
so spinning rest.
5,400 RPM spinning drive.
5,400? Oh.
Right, so this is a low-end.
Cheap Mac Mini.
The 8 gigs RAM was something I upgraded in it some time ago, right? It's like, I bought Crucial RAM off the shelf.
So you decided, I'm just curious, so you take it in the MacBook. It seems like, honestly, you're like, well, shit, now I need at least one working Mac to do my job. I should probably run Mac OS on this.
I mean, I either have to make the "you're not getting your builds" phone call, which is always, great, or I have to get a Mac running, right? Like, there's no way out of that for me. Or there's no easy and affordable way out of that for me.
Yeah.
Right? So I spent, I would say, 2.5 to 3 hours setting up this Mac Mini. It was unbelievably slow. I mean, for all the kudos I give Apple and their support, in terms of like legacy hardware running new versions of the OS, is
you might as well not exist.
Awful.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
It got to the point where I was sitting down deciding, because I took it in.
And how are you doing this, by the way? Are you downloading ISOs from the App Store on another machine and then flashing the USB? Or how are you actually even loading the OS on it?
This is where they're pretty good. Once I got a more modern version of OS 10 on it, all the other updates I could do via the OS 10.
Via software, but what the App Store or whatever. But the issue is it's not as bad on Mac OS, but you're not doing clean installs then. You're doing several upgrades.
No, you can. So once I got whatever the version app, the first cat version, right?
And it creates that recovery partition, doesn't it? Where it can then right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
okay.
like the Leopard or the Snow Leopard had the recovery partition, and that actually was smart enough to say, let me phone home to Apple. And it, believe it or not, installed whatever
they called like the Internet Recovery.
What do they call it? The new version.
And it creates like a first partition after your EFI partition.
So what it looks like it actually downloaded it off the wire.
Yeah.
So it was a long process, right?
Yeah.
It downloads the image.
Yep.
Then installs it off this recovery drive or this recovery partition. Because remember, this computer has no disk drive. So it's not like I can go burn a DVD and be like, whatever. Which wasn't bad. But then, of course, I get it on there, and I have to freaking install Xcode, which is apparently 2.5.
And you have enough drive space?
Oh, yeah, it's a 500. It's a spinning drive. Drive space is not a problem.
Yeah. I just wasn't sure if it was a big spinning drive. But I guess if it's spinning drive, that's like the one benefit, isn't it?
Yeah. So, long story short, I go through all this hassle of setting it back up. And in the meantime, because I'm sitting here, I have a makeshift L desk, right? So on my left is the Ubuntu machine. And directly in front of me is a cinema display with normally my laptop clamshelled in. And I'm just working on the Ubuntu machine. And it was actually really good. Everything was going awesome until I had to actually make an Apple binary. And then everything went to garbage because I didn't do it. Mm-hmm. Now, I looked into services. Like, there's people who will lease you Mac Mini server space. I'm very, very tempted to actually set up a Mac Mini server here because this is a really dumb problem to have and could have been incredibly bad. Because, you know this from consulting, right? Customers read it's going to be a couple of days late as something horrible is happening, right? It was not a good place. But there's positive news. I mean, it forced me to really work pretty much full time on the Ubuntu rig, which was immediately the big difference was the performance on the Ubuntu machine versus the Mac Mini.
Yeah, this is what was interesting. You tweeted on the 18th, you said, my MacBook Pro is in the shop and I had to boot up my old Mini that is comparable spec to my #Linux box. And Mac OS performs so much worse by comparison. And so go ahead and talk about this for a second, because I did an interesting experiment myself here.
Yeah, I'll put it to you this way. I can still use the Ubuntu machine with 8 gigs of RAM, spinning drive, nothing fancy, and there's no problems at all. Like, it runs fine.
Yeah, I had a similar experience where I had an opportunity to reload some older Macs, and it was everything from second or third generation Intel Macs, not the first generation, and a couple of PowerPC Macs, and in all cases, significantly faster. Significantly faster application load times. Web pages load faster. Everything is faster. Stuff that you would think would be strictly hardware bound, like the load time of an application or how a web page renders on your screen. All of it is faster on older hardware under Linux versus Mac OS. And I'm wondering if your thoughts are, my thoughts were, when I experienced this is, well, a couple of things. It would seem to reason that people that are developing different components of Linux have more motivation to optimize in different workloads, including lower-end hardware. And a lot of times when you optimize for server or mobile workloads, you automatically pick up efficiencies that just seem to work a lot better on lower-end hardware. So Linux has had a lot of attention there. But secondarily, and I think this gets to perhaps the feeling that Apple, if you have a certain age of machine that you don't exist, Apple doesn't go out of their way in any scenario ever to try to figure out a better way to do something via a driver a couple of years down the road. Their drivers pretty much don't change, and they don't change unless there's a security issue or they're introducing a new piece of hardware.
Yeah.
Whereas the Linux drivers, when you load that Dell, it's gonna literally have the latest Intel code written by Intel and contributed to the Linux kernel. If there's an NVIDIA card or an ATI card, it's gonna have the latest driver from NVIDIA for that card. It's gonna be more optimized than a driver that was written 5 years ago.
So one thing I noticed, anything where I was hitting the hard disk on either machine, that's where really the difference seemed to be coming, right? And we're talking about compiling, stuff like that. For some reason, and I think it's called HFS Plus is the reason, OS X on a non-SSD just freaking thrashes. Like, it's unbelievably slow.
Yeah, I think also
I hit swap really, really fast on OS X, where I basically got my 8 gigs of RAM on the Ubuntu, right? I mean, I opened Activity Monitor on the Mac machine, and I opened what's this? Whatever, the control panel on not Android, Ubuntu. And I think Ubuntu, I keep calling it Android. Ubuntu was using maybe half a gig for whatever I had, just like running by default. Where a clean install of OS X, it was already like half the RAM was wired in, it said.
Well, okay, so hold that thought, because there is something that for me under Linux where it falls apart. But before you go there, I want to say I don't know if it's the case with all Linux kernels and the schedulers they use and the file systems, but I do know in some cases there is a measurement that Linux does of the response time it's getting from the file system, and it will alter its cache based on the performance it's receiving from the file system, and it does that at boot, and then it does it continuously. And I don't know if I'm sure macOS does something like that, but that might attribute to sort of normalizing out some of the spinning platter stuff. But going back to memory usage, this is where it kind of falls apart for me, because there's an application I use that seems to be across all of my desktops causing issues.
What is that? Chrome? Is it Chrome?
Yeah, it's Chrome.
It's Chrome. Yeah. So that is actually a fair point, because for some reason Chrome murders OS X in a way that it doesn't devastate Windows or Linux.
Yeah.
For me. Yeah.
So sometimes I have I'll have a document with 30 links in it, and they're all just links that I want to open, and I want to open all of them in tabs at once. What happens is I can open up all these links, Chrome launches them all in tabs, and then I can generate Markdown for all of the tabs I have open, all the links, and get a little bit of information, and then I can move that into the show notes, and I can take 30 links that I've been saving throughout the entire week and immediately generate show notes from that. Very useful feature for me, because it would take me forever to go through 30 links after I've collected them. Under Linux, that can literally sometimes bring my entire computer down to its knees, where all the applications in the UI become unresponsive for a few minutes. Oftentimes, every time, if there's any tabs that have Flash in them, the Shockwave player will crash. It'll crash across all of the tabs. And then once that sort of settles itself out, and
the Shockwave player, dude, what are you doing?
That's just what Chrome says when Flash crashes, is the shock, something like that. Yeah, I know. It's just, that's the error message. So that happens, and what's weird about it is, about 10 seconds, 30 seconds, I've been waiting. I'll know that, okay, yeah, my system's not going to really bounce back from this for a while. I can go over to a Mac and literally execute the same exact command because I take them from a dock and in Chrome, and I use an extension that's synced across all my Chrome machines, and I execute the same exact command, and there's almost no noticeable overall performance impact on the system. There's some working happening, but Chrome itself remains responsive. The UI for OS X remains responsive. Everything remains active, if not, albeit a bit slower on occasion, depending on how many, if I'm opening 30, 50, 60 links at once. But almost an unachievable task under Linux. And while Linux is still struggling to get the job done, after I started on Linux before I even tried on the Mac, and before Linux has finished the job, I've already completed the work end-to-end on the Mac. I've already gotten all the links, markdown generated, and pasted into the new dock, and closed Chrome, and closed all of those tabs before the Linux machine has even finished that one job. And I know it's got to be something Chrome's doing, but then again, at the same time, should a application like that be able to take a server-grade operating system down to its knees? I don't know if that's really... So it can't all be Chrome's fault.
Well, I mean, one thing I noticed, Chrome is kind of its own world. I mean, I'm trying to think of how to say it. Like, I actually use Chrome all the time, right? So I'm not trying to denigrate Chrome at all. But in a way, Chrome is not trying to be another application in your system, right? Chrome is trying to be, I'm replacing your system. At least that's how I feel.
Okay, all right, okay. I can kind of see that logic. I mean, yeah, I can kind of see that. You know what? Actually, why don't you? Actually, I want to expand on that. Hold that thought right there. I'm going to thank DigitalOcean for a second, because now that I think about it, Mike, it's pathetically almost gotten to the point where what I need more than anything else is Chrome on any desktop. And if I couldn't use Linux, with Chrome, I might have to switch. Before we go into that. And then also we have a lot more coming up. This is a packed episode. This is the first topic. So let me tell you about DigitalOcean. Use the promo code CODERDIGITAL and get yourself a $10 credit over at DigitalOcean. Man, the world's #2 hosting provider now. That is amazing to watch them grow. And there's rumors about a new data center opening soon. I'm sure I'll tell you about that when we hear more.
New Jersey.
I don't think it's New Jersey. I think it's more like India. But we'll wait and see.
For all your Bruce Springsteen and Bon Jovi hosting needs.
It would be very convenient for Mike. So just think about it, DigitalOcean. It could be big. So what is DigitalOcean? It's your way to go spin up a machine on demand that is super fast, a great value, and really easy to manage, but not dumbed down. It's very clever in the way they've actually designed the interface. And man, does it work great. Use the promo code CODERDIGITAL to get a $10 credit. You can get started in less than 55 seconds, and pricing plans start at only $5 a month. You can get 512 megabytes of RAM for that. A 20 gigabyte SSD, because they're all SSDs. It just goes up from there. A blazing fast CPU and a terabyte of transfer. And DigitalOcean has data center locations in New York, San Francisco, Singapore, Amsterdam, London, Toronto, Germany, and who knows, a new one may be coming soon. But it's that interface. I'm not going to lie. When I first heard about DigitalOcean, everything besides the interface impressed me. Linux, KVM, SSDs, 40 gigabit E connections out to the entire world, great locations for the data center, unbelievable price. Okay, that's all pretty good. Then I started spinning up my first droplet. Then I became basically, if I could marry and have DigitalOcean's child, I would. It would be a beautiful droplet human hybrid, and I would be proud of that. Because that interface is that good. I'm committed to that interface. That's how good that is. That's a good interface. It's really good. And they have a straightforward API. So if you don't want to use the interface, you can write some code to do some stuff. Or take advantage of a lot of code that already exists. Or just sort of be like a consumer of it on the front end. You choose your distro, and they have Ubuntu, CentOS, Debian, Fedora, CoreOS, or FreeBSD. And then you can use their API sort of not even really intending to, because they will use it to deploy applications or entire stacks for you. I want to emphasize that if you're going to be deploying software in Docker, I want you to seriously consider starting with DigitalOcean's base Ubuntu 14.04 Docker image. It has prerequisite software preloaded for you. It's pulling Docker from the official Docker repos and not from the Ubuntu repos, which is a common mistake. They've integrated the GPG signatures from Docker so you make sure you're getting the right stuff. Future updates come right from upstream the way Docker wants you to get them. But the best part is, if you need to just sort of go back to basics, one click, It resets the machine right back, Ubuntu base, Docker, all that stuff. I did a Docker Nginx base, but you can mess around with this stuff. And then you just redeploy your images, your Docker containers to it, and you are literally up in seconds. A fully, you know what? You just have any issues you don't want to have to hassle with. The fact that you can go in there and click a button, it wipes out the OS and reloads the base OS with just the packages you need. But the stuff it keeps is like the little stuff you don't want to have to set up again. Like any of the networking settings you've set in there, or any of the backup settings you've set up in there, or like the DNS stuff. None of that stuff has to be redone. So it is a real quick reset right back to basics. You redeploy the container and you are up and going. I did it 3 or 4 times when I was setting up Rocket Chat for LAS. And because I wanted to have a valid, known good config that I could review from. And anytime I got a little iffy or things went off the rails or something, I was like, you know what? There is no reason to kind of have a sort of wiggly, iffy kind of feeling in the back of my mind. Reset. Redeploy. Back up and running in seconds. Use the promo code CODERDIGITAL. Go check them out, DigitalOcean.com. And a big thank you to DigitalOcean for sponsoring the Coder Radio program.
Yeah, well, Jeb, I mean, if you had, running on DO, you wouldn't have these problems. But since you're an asshole,
yeah.
And you went with
yeah, we're back. We're back. I wonder if that's where all that money went for Jeb, because it sure didn't go to winning a campaign.
But they sold me something during the checkout process.
Man, this has been, we're not going to go.
Poor Jeb. Can we all just have a brief?
Yeah. I know. I just had to say we're not going to go politics radio here, but wow. I got to be honest, man. When this whole thing started out, I had the death clock running more recently, but when the whole 2016 shenanigans started out, and he was one of the early ones to jump in, I really thought we could be looking at a Hillary versus Jeb all the way down. I thought it was going to be
Clinton Bush, the rematch.
Yeah, but you know what? The people do not want that. So, okay.
No. All right. So we were talking about how much we hate Chrome, I think.
Yeah, and what I was gonna say is it's one of those things where here I am once again, something I don't know. I obviously could do my job. I don't think I could do my job as well as I do it, as quickly as I do it, without Chrome right now.
No, I love Chrome. Half the stuff I run is in Chrome. So
yeah, and the thing is, I legitimately continue to try Firefox, and I have some applications that I now use that are really honestly applications, like an embedded IRC application is one of them. Slack and Mattermost are other ones. And when I leave them running 24/7 in Firefox, I often come back to a crashed Firefox instance. Or what happened yesterday during LAS is that my Purism laptop started to overheat.
Oh, sure.
And I'm like, what is going on? Why is my laptop overheating? And I bring up the process monitor, and I see Firefox is chewing up 100% CPU because, I've had an IRC client in Firefox running for 3 hours. And so, of course, Firefox is using up 100% CPU. And so, and then that's not even to mention the fact that half the extensions I need aren't in there. This is my long way of saying, the workflow I have in Chrome is not really replaceable at the moment.
So, yeah, it's not. I mean, just kind of getting really quick, right? So part of the thing that made the transition towards Ubuntu easy was Chrome. Because half,
Did you realize that before you started working out of Ubuntu?
Yeah, because I do I do all of my office work, writing invoices, everything's in Chrome. In terms of I don't know, what do we want to call it, general admin work I have to do, accounting and crap like that. It's all in Google, right? It's Google Drive, and Harvest and all web-based software. So I knew all of that stuff would be seamless. And in fact, if you go to DominicM.com, I wrote a little part 1 about the experience so far working on Linux. The one thing that kept coming up again and again was Linux was far better, I think, than OS X when I was using it on the command line. But once I started using GUI applications, there were weird little things that kept popping up. Nothing, workflow breaking, right? Nothing that you would be, look at that handsome devil.
Look at that guy. Mm-hmm.
What a sweet piece. Oh, Jesus.
Love it on yourself.
Hey, Chris, we could have a whole different show about that. But I think video would be required.
And maybe pay-per-view.
Oh, who's not going to pay?
Yeah,
really.
Exactly.
In fact, you can pay what Apple Pay. There's an indentation error. We talked about the corner thing last week, right? The corners of the window frames kept getting this really weird black triangle.
Yeah.
The spinner, the cursor, when you something's loading. It kept getting frozen. It would work, but it kept getting frozen on the loading icon. So I had to go into GTK Tweak and just reset it 3 times to get it to stop.
It's weird. That's glitchy, right?
That's what I'm saying. It wasn't broken per se, but there are weird glitchy UI bugs, and I talked to some people, and everybody basically has your complaint that, well, because Unity is using old GTK and it's shitty, and the programs that you're probably installing are not expecting old GTK, and therefore problems.
Yeah,
right?
And it just gets worse the longer it remains this way. And the problem is Canonical's been shipping it that way for a couple of years now.
But is it wrong to say that I kind of don't give a crap? That sounds like not my problem.
No, in fact, I think, man, that is pretty much the opinion of any regular user. I don't care why it doesn't look right. I don't care why it doesn't work.
You know, like when I publish a Mac desktop application, I can't say, oh, but they changed Aqua. Ever remember Aqua, the UI thing they used to call on Mac? It's still technically there. Oh, they changed Aqua, so it looks different. You know, there's no more blue pinstripes anymore. If my application looks out old or weird or glitchy, they blame me, right? You see where I'm getting.
What if the real average user is more like your average enterprise user, where the UI is like tertiary to everything else, like functionality and being able to use it the way I wanted to use it are the first 2 requirements, and how it looks is like, and how well it works is like a 3rd requirement maybe.
Well, it's funny because this morning I literally figured out the optimal workflow. It's do one workspace, right? Because I do the, that's just terminal in big freaking full screen. Mm-hmm. And
that works well for me too.
And from the command line, I just open up all my all my JetBrains sponsor the show tools. Seriously. And then they each have their own little workspace. Yeah. And yes, I can't install Postgres because Postgres is evil, but that's not Ubuntu's fault. But I got it to work eventually.
I'll tell you, it was when I switched to GNOME 3, I was a big GNOME hater when I did it. I really thought it was the sign that the Linux community had jumped the shark and they were never going to ship a usable desktop. And so I was like, I gotta jump in. And what I have to realize when I went in is there were prejudice I was holding about the way. I guess what I'm trying to say is, if I'm using a Mac, which I've used on and off since the 80s, because my mom was in graphic arts early on, so there was always a Mac around the house.
There's a Mac laying around, sure.
Yeah. When I'm using a Mac, I generally just have a lot of windows open, and I kind of arrange them in a way where I can move between any of them by clicking. Like I'll have one like with a corner tucking out under another one or something.
You make like a little ghetto tiled desktop.
Yeah, so a lot of people, when they see me do this, they're like, "Oh yeah, you should totally get a tiled window manager," something like that. And I'm like, "Well, I've literally been doing this for like 20 years plus, and it's really natural and instinctual to me. I arrange the windows without any thought. Just when I sit down at the Mac, that's how I start using it. I kind of use Windows that way too, actually. When I'm on Linux, when I'm on GNOME specifically, what I realized is, if I'm willing to change from that workflow, into a workflow where what I do now, and I can't really show it on the screen, is I have one desktop that's dedicated to my web browser, and then I have one desktop that's dedicated to like an app I'm checking out or using, or maybe it's my file manager. I have another desktop that's often dedicated to the chat room, which I just don't have open on this machine right now. And then I have a desktop that's dedicated to like my music program or Spotify or something like that, and or a terminal or whatever. Usually any application I plan to do some real work in gets its own desktop. And if it's just something I'm referencing real quick, I'll do the multiple window thing. Or like sometimes I'll have 2 windows on one desktop or something. I'll do that a little bit. But really what I told myself to do is I said, use GNOME the way they kind of want you to use it for 1 month. Give it a 1-month test. And if at the end of that 1 month I've used it and I don't like it, I can legitimately say it's not a workflow for me. And I stuck with that. I actually did it for 1 month. And at the end of it, I loved it. I really thought, okay, sure, this is working really well for me. And since then, Windows 10 now has virtual desktops, macOS has spaces and all that kind of stuff. But for some reason on those desktops, I'm not compelled to use that feature.
Oh my God, I use it all the time on Mac.
You're a spaces user?
Yeah.
Then the transition onto Linux probably wasn't that difficult for you.
The big difference between my workflow right now is on Mac. Let's just use the term workstation. Is that really what they're called, spaces on Mac? I never knew that.
Yeah, I think they're called spaces.
Okay, so spaces. The first space is a browser, i.e. Stack Overflow, with a terminal window, because I do have a 27-inch.
I think, now I think the chat room saying it's called Mission Control now. It used to be called Spaces. Yeah. Okay, sorry. Doesn't matter. Virtual frickin' desktops.
One OS used to call them workstations. I know that for a fact.
Yeah, like the Sun ones did. But now they're really just virtual desktops.
Whatever. But yeah, that's all they are. And then like Xcode or Android Studio or, Ruby Mine. By the way, almost all JetBrains products right there, guys. I'm just saying. Throwing it. Hell, Project Writer that I hacked into their servers and got, just come on, guys. Are like all full screen in their own workstation, in their own space, IDEs. Or, sometimes Atom if I'm doing something webby and weird, or Ionic, right? On Ubuntu, the only real difference is the first space is full screen terminal. And I think the reason is I don't like on Mac I do command space and I launch things from Spotlight. For some reason, the Unity launcher is like actually psychologically deranged. And I keep trying to open Android Studio and it keeps wanting me to buy music from Amazon or something.
Oh.
So I gave up on that, and I did all the terminal links, and I do everything from so I have Android Studio to a studio, right? Mm-hmm. I made my Symlink. Same thing for Ruby Mine. It's mine.
Yeah, that's a nice way to do it.
Well, they have built-in ones, and I just alias them to things that make sense, or that make sense to me. I don't know why Canonical can't just fix the freaking launcher thing.
Yeah, I know.
I've just kind of adapted around that, right?
It's supposed to learn. So if you start typing AN and then select go over and then select the right icon, eventually that's always supposed to be the one that comes up. But
yeah, it's terrible though. I'm not going to do that. Yeah. Here's the thing, though, right? If any of these Unity problems ever became too obnoxious, or maybe I'm going to give it like a full month with Unity, and if I decide that it's still, just not where I need it to be, I'll go to Mate, right?
Yeah, yeah. And there are, just like there's launchers for macOS, there's launchers like I don't understand. Yeah. Synapse and GNOME are a couple that work pretty good.
I used to use the Alfred launcher for macOS, and then I realized the only things I do in Spotlight are the most basic. I type out the name of an application. Yeah. And I hit return, right? It's...
Yeah. Before we go into any more of it, is there any other sort of big revelations from when you switched over to from the Mini or the Dell and were like, holy crap, this is way easier, better, faster, more efficient?
So there was a few things. And they're kind of touchy-feely, like philosophical things about different apps I've been using on Ubuntu. One, most people on OS X seem to agree on certain conventions, right? I don't know if it's because we're compelled to, if we want to be in the Mac App Store, by the human interface guidelines. But there's a general, this is how shit works, where if I download any app on the Mac App Store other than games or, pro apps, they all kind of are navigable in the same way. That does not seem to exist on Ubuntu
Interesting.
at all.
You would say a lot of Mac apps are sort of, you could almost trace their UI lineage back to early iTunes, or, you got the side column, you got the middle application.
Right, yeah. It's funny because some Ubuntu apps are very Mac OS X, very the Twitter client I'm using, something Bird. Corebird. That could be a Mac app, right?
Yeah, that's a good example of a nice GTK3 application.
Right. A lot of other stuff kind of looks busted. And I keep coming back to the most enjoyable interface is just the command line. But again, it's hard, I think, to blame it. And I've read the Ubuntu forums and people blame Canonical for all kinds of things. But I don't know how you can blame Canonical for the fact that there's just not that much good GUI software that looks native, right? It all seems to work fairly well, but yeah.
Yeah, and I would say, this is all going to change in Unity 8. They have the new...
I don't think so.
No, there's going to be a lot of apps that have a very similar design. They really have a very clear design language with these new apps. The ones I have seen, even the third-party app creators are definitely following those design hints. That said, that's going to be just a percentage of the apps you will use on a Linux desktop, because so many other apps are going to be created by people that aren't targeting specifically Unity 8. I don't think this is a problem that's ever going to go away on Linux. I really don't. And the people that are trying to solve it are the folks over at Elementary OS, and to do so,
they're making it look like Mac.
they are, yes.
I mean, that's their move, right?
And like they just announced, they are porting, the Geary development from Yobra or whatever their name was stopped.
Yeah.
And so they're taking the source code from Geary, and they're making their own email client. And as part of that, they're making it sort of follow a design convention for Elementary OS. As a result, two things. They now have a stable of apps that look all very similar. The other thing is, that now means they're maintaining all of these apps, or their community is, which is going to add weight. It's going to slow them down. And sort of also unrelated, they look like totally out of place on any other Linux desktop. So unless you're using Elementary OS, like, they just don't look like they belong.
One other point I would make, just as like someone who does publish indie dev software occasionally, right? There is a certain ease of working in an environment where you are compelled or strongly encouraged to do things a certain way.
Well, certain decisions are made for you.
They're made for you, and if there's a weird problem with that decision, 4,000 people are on Stack Overflow bitching about it right now, right? And one of them has a little workaround that's going to work for you, where, what's really interesting is last time I had a dalliance with Ubuntu, everybody was running everything in Python. Right. Now I'm seeing people are on the forums talking a hell of a lot about Vala again, which is weird because I thought Vala went away. I remember Vala from like years ago. It'll
never die, man.
Right. And then there's this whole other class of people like, well, if you want to do cross-platform, let's talk about Electron, which is kind of where I come down. I think that's probably the least bad option if you care about cross-platform at all. But again, you're not getting that native integration that you might want. You're sure as shit not getting it in Unity, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't think the folks over at GitHub are building any of that in for you.
So do you think you maybe would be happier with something like Elementary OS? And I'll tell you this. My son's been running it for just short of a year on his Dell Sputnik. And it's been one of the best OSs that I take care of for the family. Every update's pretty much. There was one update that broke Wi-Fi, but that was kind of my bad too.
I like how you define the best OS as the one that broke Wi-Fi.
Well, that was because I was screwing around with stuff. It was sort of my fault. But otherwise, it's been a really good, solid experience for him. That's very easy to navigate. It does have a very consistent look, and after a year of running it, the look still to me looks good. It still looks. Again. Probably not fair for me to pass judgment. I like that they have a developer page. I think, what you might like is that they just have a lot of effort and intention behind the look and integration of things.
It's super. Oh my God, these are the guys pimping Vala. Is that what this is?
Yes. Yes.
Geary,
their Elementary OS apps, a lot of them are written in Vala.
I used to fool around with Geary a little bit.
Yeah.
Some GitHub stuff for that. All right, so here's my problem with Elementary OS. Coming from the Mac. It looks like the Mac.
Yes.
Right, at that point, am I not just running a Mac that I can't make builds on? Basically.
Well, I guess if you like the UI of the Mac, but also like the Linux command line,
Yeah. I mean, no.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe. I
think what they would tell you, what their defense would be is, we are not copying the Mac. What we are doing is designing good interface, and a lot of times it happens to look like Mac apps.
So the all roads lead to Rome argument, basically.
I guess, yeah. It's sort of the same argument we hear from Samsung and others, but
it obviously looks good, and here's the thing, right? In fact, I got a couple weird messages from people over the last 2 weeks since we've been talking about it on the show. The fact that I'm using Ubuntu, well, now more than half time, does not mean I hate OS 10, right? I thought that would go without saying. But clearly I'm mistaken based on my inbox. I don't think it's necessarily a Boolean thing. One of the reasons is that I'm curious, and obviously, JB is a very Linux-heavy audience, so it probably would be a good idea for me to kind of think about understanding where you guys are coming from. But the other reason is perfectly practical. These Macs are expensive, like super expensive.
yeah.
And I really can't drop $2,000 every time I need to make a workstation, right?
Right.
It's a little silly.
That Noah and I were talking about on the live stream yesterday is that Mac Mini you have there. How much do you suppose? Do you remember how much you paid for that? Probably $500-600, right?
I paid $800. I keep all. Yeah. And it's garbage now. I mean, and the planned obsolete.
Yeah. And here's the thing: you can now get a NUC, a core. Now it is a Celeron NUC, but it's a decent. I mean, this newer Celerons are nicer. You can get a NUC with an SSD and RAM for $289.
Okay, doesn't System 76 make one of those puck computers?
They have the Meerkat. Yeah, that one's a nicer one, so it's more like $600. But I'm saying you can actually get an x86 Intel NUC for around say $300 if you put maybe 16 gigs of RAM in it.
That's wow. Okay, that's really cheap.
I know that's where maybe the elementary OS angle kind of makes sense. You want a well-designed OS that has a consistent design language throughout it, but you don't, but you're perfectly fine, buying a $300 NUC off Amazon. I don't know.
I kind of think that's fine, right? But ultimately, the fact that there are problems in both systems doesn't mean one is better than the other.
Yeah.
And I really, like the tone of the emails I was getting was very like, A must be greater than B, or B must be greater than A, right? There was no like, so one guy literally wrote, oh, so when are you just going to quit the Mac full time? And the answer is never, right? Because I need to make builds. Like at the bare minimum, I have to have a Mac server running somewhere. That's compiling and code signing and doing all that awful stuff you have to do. I
think there is definitely a minority of people who really see you can only be one or the other. You have to commit. But I think a lot of people view them as tools and recognize that there's probably a job that the Mac's capable of, in this case, iOS builds, that Linux is not capable of. But there's also many tasks that Linux is capable of that can do it just as fine or perhaps better.
To me, it sounds like the framework words, right? Like, oh, I write PHP and you write Java, so you're a monster. Although really it's the other way around. But
for me too, Linux would be a superior platform for video editing if I could, because I could have much more specific hardware drive arrays than I can under the Mac. I could have much better file system. I could have a lot better native performance, but because I can't, there's an area where, okay, well, we'll still use a Mac for Final Cut for a while, and I can't really do a lot about that in the meantime. So that's an example of, for me, that's a tool. It's not a matter of I prefer one OS over the other. It's literally the QuickTime pipeline and Final Cut are not available for this platform, and the stuff that is available isn't competitive. Now, there's flip sides to that too. So I find it to be I kind of find it to be an old argument, an old black and white argument that I don't think really a lot of people are worried about anymore. So I wouldn't get too upset by the emails, because to me it seems like those people are probably not in a position where they have to depend on software that's only available on another platform, and so they just aren't exposed to that perspective.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to look at it. And we've spent a lot more time talking about this than I wanted to. We spent virtually the whole show. Yeah. But I think the bottom line of this segment is that JetBrains need to start sending us some
Yeah, right, yeah, and if you're forced to use Ubuntu for a little while, it turns out it's not that bad.
But Unity's launcher is terrible. Sorry.
Yeah, you know what? You could sum all that up with a little more, There you go, ladies and gentlemen. All right, so we could conclude the Apple Talk with a quick note about Swift. Do you want to do that, or do you want to scratch it? Okay, yeah.
I want to do that, and we'll scratch my topic and do it next week.
Oh, all right. Well, okay, then let me take a pause. I'll thank Linux Academy. And then we do have one email that's kind of relevant to our conversation we should get to today. And I could really quickly mention the Cyanogen thing if you want, but we'll figure that out post-show. Post Linux Academy read. And then maybe we'll take your topic, because I even got graphics for it. I was anticipating. We'll say, one, it's a Simpsons graphic, but you'll just have to wait till next week, because we can make it next week's topic.
Jeez, all right.
I know. All right. So first, I'll tell you about Linux Academy. Support the show, keep us going, and get yourself edumacated at linuxacademy.com/coders. That's the magic URL. The magic URL. linuxacademy.com/coders. Great deal over there, and you support the show. This is a super great platform. Over 2,332 self-paced courses. I love this. You can work at your convenience at a speed that is comfortable to you, and they have 2,332 of them. Downloadable comprehensive study guides, videos you can watch, audio, PDFs. It's the good stuff. Scenario-based labs. You'll work in their advanced lab environment. Complete scenarios from beginning to end. Instructor mentoring. like nobody else. Instructor mentoring is available. If you get stuck, you need help, you got a question, you want to watch a live stream and ask live questions, Linux Academy does that. For these advanced, complicated topics that the other guys can barely even cover to begin with. They have graded server exercises, which is a really, really good practice way. If you, like me, suck at taking tests, graded exercises are nice. You perform specific tasks, and Linux Academy automatically grades your actions so you can see how well you did. Red Hat, Python, OpenStack, Android development, PHP, Amazon Web Services. One of the things I love about Linux Academy is they spin up the infrastructure on demand as part of the courseware. It's just part of your subscription, part of the courseware. 7+ distros you choose from. They automatically adjust the courseware to match your preference. And they spin up the virtual machines when the courseware requires it, including the AWS stuff. And they have really good AWS courses. In fact, on their weekly update, let's see here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people who passed AWS tests this week on Linux Academy. Congratulations to Tom and John and Matthew and Lucas. A couple of Johns in there. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 folks who passed Linux tests this week over at Linux Academy. And Mike, you'll be familiar with this one. Quick update. Linux Academy is going to have an iOS app soon, which is awesome. Just waiting on that App Store approval. Just wait. Yeah. They just a couple of weeks now. They've been waiting on that App Store approval for a couple of weeks. We know how that goes, don't we? So, Linux Academy is there. They've got great courseware based around the stuff you want. They have an exploding staff making sure all the courseware stays relevant. They get new stuff on. The people that are working on this stuff love it. They're passionate about it. That's a huge deal for Linux Academy, and it comes through. In-depth resources to help you learn the stuff that you need to do your job. linuxacademy.com/coders. And a big thank you to Linux Academy for sponsoring the Coder Radio program. Go check them out. Support the show. Visit them, linuxacademy.com/coders. Okay, so do you want to talk about the Swift thing? Do you want to talk about that at all?
Gloss over it real quick.
Just super quick. The big news today.
Big news today, breaking news. IBM and Apple are solidifying their marriage with Swift-powered clouds via IBM. Is that fair?
That's the long and short of it, is the deal is expanding, and now IBM is positioning themselves as the premier cloud platform for your Swift code.
I was trying to find some more details on, what is this like? Is this like an Azure Mobile Services type play?
Yeah.
Is this a little like CloudKit?
It's so laced in corporate speak. Could you even...
Right. I have no idea what the solution is.
Yeah, it's hard to parse.
I know that it's expensive because it's from IBM, and I know that runs Swift, so okay.
When they made their first deal, it was really kind of ambiguous too. And then you actually started to see, okay, it's actually developing.
Okay, so here's the line, right? What the IBM Cloud now provides enterprise app developers with is a set of tools for writing software in Swift that's intended to run on servers rather than smartphones. Okay, but there's 20 open source projects that do that already, but fine. Why? Right?
I think for some reason there's more to IBM working with Apple than we're taking. There's more to it. I wonder if it's an anti-Google move.
It feels like an anti-Microsoft move, right?
That too, yeah, that too. It feels like IBM making a hedge.
Because I really have two sets of customers. There are the customers who can afford to deal with Microsoft, and the ones that can't. And
what's the risk for IBM here? Swift is now open source, right? So they have an insurance policy there.
Well, the risk is they develop this infrastructure and this. I'm assuming they're developing some kind of software platform, that they're not just saying, yeah, here's an Ubuntu server, run Swift on it. But who the hell knows? There's a risk of losing money, right, or of not getting sales.
I'll tell you what it does is it outsources a particular component that Apple is not extremely strong at, and gives it to a company that's sort of all they have left.
Yeah, that seems like where the IBM-Apple marriage kind of makes sense, right? Because Apple, I was trying to stream a movie on Apple TV, and of course iTunes was having problems this weekend.
Tim Cook says that he sees enterprise as a major part of the company's growth going forward, and taking advantage of the IBM partnership to get Swift into more businesses is a big part of that.
I don't get it. Are they going to try to go after Java EE developers?
IBM already has 100 enterprise apps that it's created through its partnership with Apple, and all of them are written in Swift.
Yeah, but that's if you're an IBM customer and you want to deploy iOS devices.
Yeah. So that must be what this is people that have iPads and iOS devices in-house that need
Yeah.
back-end server infrastructure for these Swift applications, and they want to write it in Swift. This is what we were talking about a couple of weeks. This is what we were talking about like 3 weeks ago, man. Is Swift could take off because if you can come in and write the front end and back end, and all these people are bringing in iPads and iPhones anyways.
But who's gonna do that?
Well,
who's
somebody must be doing it. IBM's not dumb, right?
Yeah, but all these enterprises have like .NET and Java developers on staff right there that can write them something in Java EE.
And they're going to run those mobile versions on what?
What do you mean?
Phones that have a 1% market share?
They could do what they've been doing for 7 years. Hire a contractor to develop the mobile app that just ties into the back end.
I think I don't understand why they. I mean, just for me personally, I don't understand why any app developed internally wouldn't just be mostly a web app. But that being said, one of the things we keep hearing over and over again, some of the rhetoric about this IBM Apple deal is bring your own device has fundamentally changed the enterprise. And I did begin to see that. I came from an era where you had a company-issued BlackBerry, and that's what you got. And I watched that era very, very, very quickly transform into, well, this person has an iPhone, so we make an exception to pretty much, oh, yeah, if you want to get an iPhone, we'll just give you $100 credit towards it.
Hey, man, I got a lot of early dev jobs that way. Yeah, we got a new CEO. He's got a Mac, and yeah, you need to write a version of this for it.
So maybe it really is making a difference.
Is it? Okay, but why? You haven't answered the question, right? So the app on the CEO's phone, sure, and the reason it's not a web app, by the way, is because people hear web app and sometimes they think cheap. And I've had this happen several times, pitching Ionic, pitching hybrid solutions like that. Some people at some levels have, well, I think I mentioned this on the show before. I had one client who told me, well, Android's for poor people, right?
Yeah.
There's a perception that the native Apple solution is the premier solution.
I guess it feels so short-sighted to... why would you go through the era of Microsoft lock-in and then just hand it over to Apple and be locked into iOS devices?
This makes no sense to me, right? Because the world as it exists today, if you're a mobile app developer, is company, let's call them Acme Co., right? Just, Wile E. Coyote's company, calls you and says, hey, we've got this this service we use on our desktops. There's a web backend. We want a mobile version of it. Here's the API documentation. Hopefully there's API documentation. Go ahead and tie into that.
I think the chat room is getting close, and here's what I think it is, Mike.
Go ahead.
I think it's a series of dominoes that easily fall. And what that is a lot of iOS devices come into the enterprise. They have a long lifespan, because they get 4 years of OS updates, so people are sticking with them for a while. And you have enterprises that are going to be damn cheap and efficient, and they're going to say, why have two people when I can have one person write the front end and the back end?
Okay, but virtually no enterprise is writing a brand new web service for their mobile app, right? They're modifying or having you tie into their existing service. So it is more expensive.
But that existing service. But here's why it's easy: because that existing service and infrastructure is likely already a deal in partnership with IBM. IBM has so many deals and partnerships that they don't have to resell. They can sell into their existing established relationships.
If you have your web service that was written in Java 5 years ago that you've been updating. You have a core team of Java developers, which many of these enterprises do, or Microsoft. But let's do Java because I think it's probably more common. Why the hell would you rewrite that in Swift just because? Greenfield, maybe, right? Greenfield because, Apple.
You'd have to have a motivation, but there must be just enough there must be enough projects out there, right? I mean, you take all of the thousands and thousands of custom business apps out there. There's turnover, there's churn eventually.
Every meeting I take is about minimizing the amount that they have to change on their end.
I agree. I've never had
an enterprise customer come to me and say, Mike, fuck it, we're throwing it out.
I have had a couple where they're like, we have to completely rewrite the app because it depends on a plugin for Internet Explorer. And then my last big client was definitely one of those. And they were rewriting for iOS, but they were creating a web app. So to me, the long-term investment would be to create something that's web-powered. If you create a custom native app, what you're probably doing is you're probably writing a wrapper for your web app. Or you're creating a wrapper for your back-end application.
You're writing a client for your web app.
Yes.
That's all you're doing.
Yeah.
But let me tell you a little secret. Enterprise customers are crazy. They're nuts.
I agree with the anime. The game is essentially afoot. This is the beginning piece of a bigger thing, and I think it's
something else is happening.
And
right?
You know what else I find to be fascinating about it, and this is my personal opinion, is Apple being one of the largest companies in the world, obviously one of the largest tech companies in terms of revenue, and to me, it feels like they are a pawn in a larger game IBM is playing. Like somehow it feels like Apple is actually the one getting moved around here, even though they're benefiting. Like this seems to me like a hedge by IBM or some kind of move by IBM to cut out a deal with Microsoft or Red Hat or Google or whoever, right? It just feels like a hedge.
Is that really? I would not.
I'm just throwing out names. I don't know who it is. I'm not because I don't want to make it sound like it's an anti-Google thing. It does feel like a partnership that they struck with Apple to avoid somebody else getting a foothold.
See, if I'm Apple, I think I'm kind of the belle of the ball, right? Because all of my competitors, I'm kind of beating where it matters, right? I'm beating them in terms of selling really expensive hardware to people. And the things I'm bad at are all their strengths. So like, the IBM Apple marriage makes sense. Why the Apple Microsoft marriage hasn't happened?
They're beating, you know what, Mike? They're not just beating them. They are beating them in a way that is unbelievable because what they are beating is an entrenched system they're beating, an entrenched system where the people, when you get a job, they get a BlackBerry or you get a Microsoft-controlled device. They're still winning even when that is the competition they were moving into. Now, I'm sure some companies are like, no iPhones here. Like, that's still a thing. But in terms of like people just bringing their own devices, it's amazing how much success they've gotten in the business without even really trying.
They're running the table. Right. I mean, there's no way around that. I would even say they're actually, Google is not holding its own. It's starting to finally lose ground, only because, and this might be my praising, I think Google has in a way devalued the Android brand. Go clean up your app store. Right. I just want to throw it out there.
It's gotten better, but yeah,
it's gotten better. But and I understand developing markets, and that's what you've decided to do, but boy, are those Chinese people really happy to get iPhones. Oh, and by the way, the developing market's getting less poor every day. And Apple doesn't seem shy about cutting prices anymore when they need to.
Well, and the 5C, becomes the free phone.
Last year's model's like free. I have an 8-year-old brother who got an iPhone because why? It was free. I mean, it's a little ridiculous. What I don't understand in this deal, and I'm not asking you to answer it because we'll see it in the coming months, is I understand what IBM gets out of this deal, relevance, and that's something they desperately need. The fact that Business Insider wrote an article about IBM that doesn't involve the word layoffs is great because that's what they've been doing. But I would not, if I was Tim Cook, I would not be taking IBM to bed because they are sneaky as shit, right? I mean, just if you go read some. There's a great book by Robert X. Cringely. He's the guy who did those old PBS shows about the first PC revolution, then the internet. IBM has a really bad habit of screwing their employees and their partners.
Well, so does Apple, though.
Especially if you're like someone from the United States and they want to hire someone. At least
the Steve Jobs era was famous for screwing partners.
Right, but Steve Jobs knew enough to hate them. Right? I mean, just saying. Yes, he dealt with them at Next, but they don't have a good history of being honest brokers. Some of us are bitter, perhaps, but I have no personal grudge against them. I've never dealt with them at all, other than like 3 phone calls inquiring about offering their services. Just go ahead and even go to like ZDNet or any of those tech sites and just search on IBM, search the archives about their most recent stories, other than Apple. And you'll get a picture not of a healthy technology company,
right,
but of a company that
is sort of restructuring.
Restructuring is a nice way to say firing everybody who's not making $3 an hour.
Right.
I mean,
I guess I want to conclude the Apple conversation here on this and the relevant. So 2 things. This is going to increase the relevancy of Swift, which is sort of the big picture thing to take away from this conversation. Is this is moving Swift up a notch, and number 2, and that's something we don't really have time to get into today, is it to me thoroughly underscores how critical the DOJ versus Apple or the FBI versus Apple cases right now, because of these devices in enterprise, corporate espionage is absolutely a thing. And when you weaken these devices, it also means it's going to weaken the devices in all of corporate America. And so it's just something to think about, depending on which way this case goes.
I do not see Apple winning. I mean, it seems insane. But
yeah, I don't see them winning either, because they're not actually asking for a backdoor to encryption. What they're asking for is the ability to brute force the passcode. And what they're really asking for is a removal of the delay when you're trying to enter a bunch of passcodes, and the removal of the 10 entry wipe.
It's not like that. There's a lot of, I'll be a tool. There's a lot of stupid people who are scared of things they don't need to be scared of, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. But you know what?
And that's going to work.
I think it might actually, you know what, now I think about it, Mike, if you think about the practical implementation of how, so what we have here is we have an iPhone 5C that is currently locked, right? Passcode required to enter it. You enter it 10 times, it's going to wipe the phone. Here's my question. How do you install an iOS update on a phone that is locked? You can't. You have to unlock the phone before the update will install. So if Apple wrote a forked version of iOS that removed the 10 entry wipe, there's no way to get it on the phone. So I actually think what they are asking for is actually a backdoor, because Apple would have to bypass that restriction to reflash the phone. So it's not just a matter of they're asking for PIN code bypass. They're also asking for...
So let me ask you a question. Why do you care if it's a backdoor, front door, or window? If the end result is I can break your encryption and unlock your phone and get your personal data, I don't give a rat's ass how they did it.
Well, because the case that James Comey and the FBI is making today is this is a narrow request. We're asking just to be able to bypass their passcode. We're not asking to backdoor encryption. We don't want a backdoor on every iPhone. What we want is just to simply turn off the 10 entry wipe, and then we will brute force the password entry. That's how they're pitching it. But in order to bypass that
tool,
in order for Apple to install that ability on the phone, you would have to have a backdoor on the phone to bypass the fact that it is locked right now to install the update that turns off the update wipe.
So Apple's position seems to be that they can't do it.
Well, what they can't do is they can do it. They absolutely can do it. But they don't have the code that exists, so they'd have to create it. And now, if you ask me, that's asking for somebody, because in the past, courts have ruled that code is speech. That is precedent that is in law today.
So Apple will hide behind the Fifth Amendment because...
Or the First Amendment saying you are forcing speech. This is a violation of freedom of speech.
Fair enough. Yeah. I'm sorry, and I agree with you, but I don't see a world where they're not compelled to do this.
Yeah, I agree. But it's no mistake that it was a San Bernardino shooting. There's lots of other phones out there. And by the way... And just in case you guys don't know, I'm sure everybody does, but Apple did cough up and hand over the iCloud backup. So remember all this bullshit about how secure your physical iPhone is. An image copy...
As soon as you turn iCloud on, you're fucked.
An image copy is up on Apple servers, and they can go get it with a subpoena anytime they want. They don't even need to get your phone. The only reason why they can't do it in this case is because after the phone was in FBI custody, the iCloud account password was changed, which, guess what?
Some cop made a mistake and tried to reset the password.
Something like that, yes. Or somebody at San Bernardino did.
Yeah. Admitted they screwed up. So had they not made that mistake, by the way, Apple would have happily done it. So that's the really interesting part about this.
Exactly. The thing we're all missing is your iCloud backup is actually the weakest link in the chain.
But just real quick, I know Chris hates politics, but one thing to consider on all this kind of privacy stuff is a little law called the Patriot Act.
Yeah.
Which has, to date, not successfully been used to prosecute terrorism. But it has put plenty of minor league tax cheats in jail and minor league drug dealers in jail. And I'm not saying that tax cheats and drug dealers are necessarily people we should want to protect. But, a guy who takes an extra deduction on his tax return, does he not have the right to not be, compelled to testify against himself? And is it really appropriate that his bank will totally sell him out? I'm just saying, or
a cellular carrier. I mean, they could get copies of all the metadata.
Your bank, in fact, I needed cash 6 months ago when I was going down to Florida, and I had to withdraw from the bank. And the manager of the bank came and talked. She said, "Just so you know, if you do this 2 more times within the quarter, I have to report it because they're going to say that you're hiding income."
Azer's pointing out, and I do remember, I recall this, that now the San Bernardino Police Department's claiming that the FBI told them to reset the password. That's why
just orders. It worked real well in Germany too.
Yeah, so it is sort of a big deal, this case, I think, because I think it has implications on if code is speech, which I think is relevant to everybody listening, and I think it has implications on the security of these devices that are in corporate America, which is very relevant to a lot of people's interest.
They're gonna get it. There's no way they won't get it.
So in the show notes, real quick, I'm just going to give it a mention. Cyanogen today announced a platform for deeper integration with apps in Android, which is basically like an API to the lower levels of Cyanogen. Skype is taking advantage of it to get a native dialer for VoIP calling. Cortana is going to get free multitasking for hands-free, including voice-activated selfies. They're going to also get hyperlapse integrated with the camera. OneNote's going to have many entry points into the OS. Truecaller, the only non-Microsoft product, is going to get spam call blocking capabilities.
It almost sounds like they made a deal with Microsoft, but
yeah, well, they're making. You know what? The truth is they did, but they're making the API available to anybody. It looks like that's coming. I don't know if that's going to really move the needle at all, but it's an interesting way to compete with Google using Android, which I find to be fascinating. And Microsoft continuing to invest in Cyanogen, which is kind of funny.
strange.
Last but not least, Peek Poo J writes in, Dev Laptop Pro Tips. Mike mentioned using Rails on Ubuntu. Here's my 2 cents while my setup at work. Our app uses JSON-B in Postgres, so in order to do integration tests on the whole stack, we use Docker Compose to orchestrate the container setup and link the app container to a Postgres container. Now, that's a really complicated thing he just said there, but what he's really saying is it is very simple to use Docker Compose. I've done this to say this container can talk to this container for database purposes. They're linked. He says, I know Docker was covered on the show a long time ago, but if you haven't checked it out, the newer tooling around Docker, it's much more mature now than when it was just the Docker file. That's very true, too. Very cool thing now that, I know it's sort of dumping in the deep end, but once you've been on Ubuntu for a little while, you might consider replaying with the Docker stuff because there's a lot of good guides now, really good tools, and it makes, setting up an environment, working in it, snapshotting and blowing away, restoring all that really easy. It's just a couple of commands. And not only that, but there's a lot of good containers that you can just inherit software. You can get whole software setups and save a ton of time. I'm not saying you should put it in production, but if you're just using it to test or build stuff, it's a really cool tool. And that's something that is pretty nice and something I've been playing more and more with Mike. So now once you get comfortable, once you get your sea legs, might be worth checking out. All right, well, guess what? We got a lot to cover next week on the show. There's a couple other things we're here to cover. Thank you to Pinky Poo, Jay, for going to coderradio.reddit.com and submitting feedback. That's where you go to give feedback to this episode, to give us links and discussions to talk about, topics you think would be interesting. Or you can follow Mike on the Twitters. Mike, where would they go to do that?
That's @Dumanuka on Twitter.
That's magic. You can follow me @ChrisLES. The show's live on Mondays. We do it at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern at jblive.tv. You can go to jupiterbroadcasting.com/calendar to get it converted to your local time zone. All right, everybody. Well, thank you for tuning this week's episode of Coder Radio. Oh, I'll leave you with this. We also like your emails. Send us in some of those. jupiterbroadcasting.com/contact. We appreciate it. All right, and now I'll wrap it up by saying thanks so much for tuning this week's episode of Coder Radio. See you right back here next week.